Welcome. It's my sincere privilege to welcome all who've tuned in to Doctors Manitoba Vaccine Town Hall for Morden, Winkler, and Southern Manitoba. On behalf of the physicians participating tonight and Doctors Manitoba, I want to begin by acknowledging that the medical services across Manitoba are located on the original lands of First Nations and Inuit peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the First Nation treaties made on these territories, acknowledging harms and mistakes, and we dedicate ourselves to collaborate in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in the spirit of reconciliation. My name is John Klassen. I've been asked to host the event tonight. I've lived in Winkler most of my life and have served as a pastor in this community and in Southern Manitoba for over 35 years, recently retired from full-time ministry. More importantly for tonight, I had the privilege of receiving my second dose of the vaccine this past Saturday. I chose to do so for personal reasons, family and health and community-wise. For selfish reasons, I'd like to have things more open, but also as an expression of my faith commitment, believing it fits well with Christ's call to love others and to care for the most vulnerable in our society. But this evening isn't about me. Our purpose tonight is to allow some community health experts to answer questions you have about vaccines and vaccinations. I'll explain the format in a moment or two, but first we want to allow our physicians to introduce themselves. Each will offer a short introduction, and if they wish, just add a very brief opening comment. Let's begin with Dr. Martin.
Hi, I'm Dr. Martin. I work in Morden, Manitoba, and I also work at Boundary Trails Hospital, both in the ER with inpatients as well as through the community cancer care program there. Mostly I'm here tonight because I've had a lot of fears and concerns expressed to me from my patients, and I'm just hoping to provide some more information to have people make their informed decisions for themselves.
I'm Kevin Convery. I'm also a family doctor based out of Menzies Medical Center in Morden, and I work at Boundary Trails Health Center providing inpatient care as well as anesthetic services for the operating room and sometimes in critical care, even for COVID patients who might need to be intubated before they're transferred to Winnipeg. And I also am the local dialysis physician here in the community. And I also work at Tabor Home, which is the personal care home in Morden.
Hi, I'm John Klassen. I'm a family physician slash anesthetist, as my colleague Kevin is. We both work at Boundary Trails. I also work in the emergency room, and I have another role with the university as the associate head of the Department of Family Medicine. I'm proud to say I was first in line, almost first in line, to get the vaccine, and I'm here to try and answer any questions that we can for you, so that you can make an informed decision, as Katie has already mentioned.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Dr. Joss Reimer. I'm a medical officer of health and the medical lead for the Vaccine Implementation Task Force for Manitoba. I also do prenatal care and deliveries at Women's Hospital. Unlike these other docs, I don't work in the Winkler or Morden area, but I did grow up there. And so that's why I wanted to join this town hall tonight, is because I still see that as a big part of my community. My parents, my in-laws still live there. Some of you may have had my dad as your family doctor, because he still works in Winkler as a family doc alongside these docs at Boundary Trails. So I'm just really looking forward to answering questions that you might have about the vaccine to help you feel confident in it, so that we can all protect each other.
Thank you to each of you. And thank you to Doctors Manitoba for planning tonight's town hall. This is the first of 4 town halls that are being planned for this week. So if you have family or friends who happen to miss this one, you can let them know about the ones that are happening tomorrow, Wednesday or Thursday. Details are posted at manitobavaccine.ca. And I would encourage you to jot down that website because it's going to be referenced a number of times this evening. manitobavaccine.ca. We're thankful for the excellent panel who are willing to share answers this evening, and we want to devote the rest of the time to doing that. And you have an opportunity to contribute questions as well using the chat feature on your screen. I will say that we've had over 70 questions submitted in advance, which Doctors Manitoba has gathered into about 30 questions. And I think all of us realize 1 hour, 30 questions, 4 people, we realize how that adds up. So we're going to try really hard to focus on as many questions as we can this evening. If we don't happen to get to your question, there is a panel of physicians who is continuing to add more answers to common questions at manitobavaccine.ca, the site I've mentioned already. I spent some time on that site this afternoon because I hadn't been there before and found that they've already answered 40 to 50 questions. Most of the common ones we'll hear again today. But that's enough intro. Let's get to the questions that were submitted. And along the way, if some of your questions are being submitted, the people at Doctors Manitoba will pass them on to me and I'll add them to the conversation this evening. Let's start with some basic questions about the COVID vaccines and how well they work. Dr. Klassen, can you tell us how well these vaccines work? Why do doctors recommend them?
So I would say that what you folks have all, and we all have seen in the last year and a half, is essentially science in action on the nightly news and on our various feeds. And that's just a preamble to saying things change in a year and a half, and a number of things have changed and are changing, and that's based on continuing accumulation of evidence. But in a nutshell, the 3 vaccines that have been utilized in Manitoba have all been proven to be very effective. I think our nursing home experience is the one really good example of how effective they have been. Why do we recommend them? We recommend them because they appear to be working, and they are keeping people out of hospital. They are keeping people from getting severe illness. Nothing's 100%, but it's very good.
Okay, and your answer sort of sets up the next question. I'll ask Dr. Martin to answer that one. What is the percentage of people getting COVID after they've been vaccinated, once and twice after their after the 2-week period?
So I think one of the sort of amazing things that we found with the vaccine is that when we often do clinical trials before they get into the real world population, the efficacy in the trial doesn't always seem to match up with the real world population. But that's not what we've been finding. So for instance, with the Pfizer vaccination, after the first dose, we've been finding about 73% effective 2 weeks afterwards. And then with the second dose up to 90%. Likewise with Mrna, it's similar. So it's 82% and 93% in those scenarios. In terms of people who are ending up with COVID and in regard to the vaccination, most of those episodes occurred when it was less than 2 weeks after having received the vaccination or after having had only one vaccination. 96% of the cases were when in those individuals, as were 93% of the hospitalized cases of people who had been vaccinated and 88% of deaths. So overall, it's been very, very, the 88% of deaths and the unvaccinated are those that had been following into those groups. Overall, it's proven to be very effective in the real world population.
Thank you. And I want to remind you that the questions I'm asking are the questions that people have submitted. These aren't my questions. I'm passing them on. Dr. Convery, I'm curious about the death rate in young people from COVID in comparison to the vaccine. We are very low risk for COVID, but I can't really find any info about our risks with the vax. How would you respond?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. And we know still for young, healthy people, the benefits of getting vaccinated outweigh the risks of getting COVID and developing a serious complication from the illness. So the risks we're seeing a little bit more in the subsequent waves, that more young people are being affected and needing ICU care. Some young people have died from COVID, as I'm sure you've all seen on the news. And so the risk of a serious illness in a young person is low, but it's not zero. So there is still risk there. And if you look at the benefits of the vaccination, I mean, the vaccines have been shown to be exceedingly safe, and they offer good protection from the things already mentioned: hospitalization, serious illness, and death. I looked online for some of the numbers, and 28 million doses have been given in Canada, as for what I could find on the government website. And there's been about 1,500 serious adverse reactions, and some of them are still being looked into. In terms of deaths, I couldn't find any evidence of anyone who's died from the vaccine, especially the mRNA vaccination. I know there's been some clots with the AstraZeneca that have been reported. I don't know the exact numbers. The last I heard, it was about 1 in 60,000 of people getting clots. Not all of those people are dying. So even for young people, I still tell my patients the 3 big reasons to get vaccinated. I think you'll hear this message over and over again tonight. First, you want to protect yourself. Second, you want to protect those that you love, so your family and friends. And third, it's for your community, and it's so we can all get back to a more normal life. So those are the big 3 reasons to consider it.
Thank you. Dr. Reimer, one of the questions asked is this: why do I need a vaccine for something that I have a 99.7% chance of surviving?
Yeah, that's a great question, because people do see the number that most people survive and think, well, this must not be serious. But when there's so many cases around the world, that still translates to a lot of people getting really sick and a lot of people dying. We've seen so many of our loved ones, our community members, who have ended up with symptoms that lasted for months, who can't go back to the sports or their job or their school. So, even if you're unlikely to die, that still doesn't mean I want you to get sick. I don't want you to experience any of those serious health outcomes, and certainly don't want people to die, even if that's a low risk. And then on top of that is I don't want people to spread it to anyone else. So maybe you're young and healthy, but you might have a grandparent around you, or maybe nobody around you, but somebody that you spread it to could spread it to someone else who experiences a really severe outcome. So we really want to just, we don't want to see any more of these people in hospital. We don't want to see any more deaths. We don't want it to be you or anyone in your community. And that's why we recommend you get vaccinated, whether or not you personally are at the high risk of dying.
Thank you. Dr. Klassen, another question here is, I've heard that COVID cases are wildly overstated. Some have told me that PCR testing used to test for COVID is inaccurate, wasn't designed for test for this disease, and that there are a lot of so-called positive cases that are not infectious. How do you respond to that sort of question?
The PCR, polymerase chain reaction test, has been utilized for other diagnostic procedures and testing for quite a number of years. And it is, to the best of our knowledge, the best test to diagnose COVID. Cases are, to my mind, and from what I've read, are not wildly overstated. In fact, I think they tend to be somewhat understated. I have spoken with a number of patients who've told me, 2 of them today, that they are pretty sure they had COVID, and by their description, I was pretty sure they had COVID. They stayed home, they did the right things, but did not go and get tested. So I think we've all had that experience. So we think, if anything, there is under testing going on. Just another quick example, someone suggested to me one day in the emergency department that we doctors like to tell everybody they have COVID. I said it was actually 180 degrees from that. I would love to tell everyone that they do not have COVID.
Thank you. Dr. Convery, if you have already had COVID, should you still get the vaccine?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a patient in the office this week in this situation. He was sick in December, and we discussed his need for vaccination. So while natural infection will give you some immunity, we don't know for how long that will last. And we also don't know how good that immunity is against the new variants that are popping up in the community. So it is currently the recommendation, if you've had a COVID infection, that you do get vaccinated with 2 doses of the vaccine, just like other members of the community.
Okay, and before I move to the next question, I'm just going to offer a reminder to everyone watching and a note to those who may have tuned in later. You can get up-to-date information at manitobavaccine.ca. This site is independent from the government's COVID website, and it's created and maintained by Manitoba physicians. We're trying our best to get through as many questions as we can in this hour, but if we happen not to get to your question, please go to that site, and there's a good chance that your question will be answered on that site. That's manitobavaccine.ca. Let's move to some questions around vaccine development, which people have been asking as well. It seems to have happened very quickly. And so I'm going to ask you two questions, Dr. Convery, that are somewhat related. Are these vaccines still experimental? And don't these vaccines only have emergency authorization so far? In other words, are they as safe as we want them to be?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So the vaccines that are authorized in Canada are not experimental treatments. They did complete all 3 stages of clinical trials, which vaccines have to do. Now, this happened quicker than it would for previous vaccinations. And there's lots of reasons for that. It had to do with the mRNA technology that's been in existence for many years. It has to do with the amount of collaboration that existed internationally between different governments and different researchers sharing their data on the virus. It had to do with the amount of funding that they received. They could do these trials sort of at the same time. They could do stage 3 while stage 2 is wrapping up. So there was a lot of differences for this, but the extra speed, it didn't cut any corners in terms of safety. They still had to meet all of the safety requirements. And since they've been authorized for use, there's ongoing studies with the 2.7 billion doses that we've been using now worldwide. The emergency use authorization is a term that comes from the United States. And I learned as I was preparing for this talk that we have something similar in Canada. It's called an interim order. So our vaccinations were authorized under an interim order by Health Canada. So again, this was created just to expedite some of the bureaucratic steps, but it's not lowering the bar to make these things get through when they're not ready to get through the rigorous testing for a safe and effective use with our patients in the population. So this type of interim order, it could be used for other indications. So for instance, there's lots of talk about other treatments for COVID. And I know one big one that we're probably going to talk about tonight, because I've heard it from my patients, is Ivermectin. So if all of a sudden studies started showing that Ivermectin was useful for either preventing or treating COVID, it would have to go through the same process and receive an interim order for approval by Health Canada. So that's kind of how this vaccine was allowed to be used so quickly, but we still feel it's exceedingly safe and it's exceptionally effective at preventing illness.
Well, you've offered us a wonderful segue into the next question. There were quite a number of questions, numerous questions that people submitted, which talked about other ways of preventing COVID-19. And for example, there were quite a lot of questions about ivermectin. And here's one of those as a sample, and I'll read it. It's got many parts to this question. Dr. Martin, you can maybe give the first answers, and then maybe some of the others want to weigh in as well. But here's the question. Recently, I've heard numerous people talking about ivermectin and its use as a treatment for COVID-19, and even as a preventative for contracting COVID-19. There's a lot of info about ivermectin online, including small clinical trials in many countries. Is it possible that ivermectin can fight a virus? What are the potential risks? Are you discouraging people from using it, encouraging people to try it? Are there risks or downsides to taking it? Can a patient request it? Are studies being done with it? So a whole raft of questions around ivermectin. Why don't you start, Dr. Martin?
Yeah, I'll try my best there. So there are studies ongoing about ivermectin, including one in Canada as well. And they're right, there have been a lot of little studies, observational studies of small numbers in different countries that are perhaps suggesting that there might be a benefit. To date, we haven't seen a lot of robust data and real world use to kind of help us with those numbers and to make sure that it's safe. We kind of learned the hard way with hydroxychloroquine. We all sort of jumped on that bandwagon, and then in the studies, people actually ended up doing worse a lot of the time with that medication. And so we're cautious to try and not do that again. The ivermectin started in vitro studies, so not in vivo in people. And they used very high doses that we don't actually obtain when we prescribe ivermectin for the other reasons that it has been approved for in the past. So that's part of the question too. Are we going to be able to get those effects in doses that are safe for people to take? Because I know it's been a medication that's around for a long time, but those high doses do have the potential to cause side effects. So nausea, vomiting, dizziness, even in really severe cases, things like coma and death. And I'm not saying that to scare people, but that's part of the reason that these studies are ongoing. So right now in Canada, it is being used if you are registered as part of the study. And even the creator of that study is saying that he has more hope for it as a treatment than as a preventative medication. And when you look at countries like Brazil, well, they had a little sort of early illness starter pack that included different medications. And this started, I believe, in the summer of last year, that had ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and some other medications as well as azithromycin. And you look at their numbers there as well. And I haven't seen a lot of great evidence that that's been helping. They've been struggling with numbers just as we have, if not even more so. So realistically, I will be more than happy to see a study that tells me that ivermectin helps treat COVID, and I would be more than happy to start prescribing it once I have that evidence, because I really would like something else to help us treat this illness. And it's not that we're not looking at other medications, people needing oxygen for COVID infection. We've discovered that dexamethasone is helpful, so we get people started on that, and we have a fair amount of evidence to suggest that it is helpful. So that's what we're waiting and we're looking for right now.
Do any of the other doctors want to weigh in?
I would agree with what Dr. Martin said, summed it up nicely.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Katie. And I think it's just a matter of a study that would show, or a series of studies that would show us some good evidence for it. We do try and be evidence-based in our recommendations, and so, as you mentioned, hydroxychloroquine didn't meet the test. Dexamethasone seems to have met the test. Ivermectin, the jury is certainly far from out, and we just don't know where that's going. We know that the studies from that we've done with the vaccines in the real world studies are looking very good. So it's a matter of looking at all the tools in our toolbox.
As a layperson listening here, what I'm hearing, and I hope I'm capturing it right, but is that I'd rather go with something that has been tested completely than something that's still in the testing stages. But it would be nice, as you've said, if more possibilities existed, and so you continue to test. There's a question here that I'm going to ask all of you to answer. You can take turns answering it, but it says this: some people have wondered if doctors are required to push the vaccine and told not to offer alternatives like ivermectin. So let me ask you clearly, are any of you being silenced in any way? Are you being paid to promote this certain vaccines? Do you face sanctions if you speak out against what Doctors Manitoba or health experts are saying?
So I'll take that one on as the old guy in the room. I do not know that I face any sanctions. I haven't been told that I face any sanctions. I am not told to push or promote vaccines. If I appear to be pushing or promoting them, it's because I am convinced by the evidence and I see it as our way out of the pandemic. A year ago, we didn't have a vaccine as a tool. We now have it, and it appears to be the tool that's going to be very good at getting us to that state we want to get at. Finally, I was fascinated to hear from someone today that each of the panelists here was being paid $20,000 to appear tonight. I don't think that's true. We all volunteered our time. In fact, I know Dr. Martin is on call at the hospital, and she was able to find a colleague who looked after her call there so that she could participate here this evening. So thanks for doing that.
Someone else.
Yeah, maybe I'll add on to that one that, we hear these kinds of things all the time, that doctors are paid to push certain things, but we actually don't get paid for prescriptions at all. We don't get paid for recommending vaccines. In fact, we probably lose money when we give vaccines in the clinic because we actually get paid a lot less for a vaccine visit than almost anything else we could do in the clinic. So if your doctor is vaccinating you in the clinic, they're doing that at a potential financial loss to them. And they're doing it because they believe in it and they want what's best for you. So I certainly didn't get $20,000 for tonight. I don't know if Doctors Manitoba has different plans they didn't tell us about, but no, like none of us are paid or have any relationship with any of these pharmaceutical companies. We truly want what's best for Manitobans. We all live here, and that's our goal and that's our incentive.
I must be special because I received today at my doorstep this awesome t-shirt from Doctors Manitoba. Thank you for the delivery. And I'm here tonight because I'm happy to be here answering questions from the members of our community about this important topic. We try not to push anything, or at least certainly I don't in my practice. I do promote preventative health. I think this vaccination is an amazing opportunity to treat a global pandemic, a virus that's just changed our life so much in the last few years. So I will promote the vaccination, but I don't push anything on anybody. I will have a discussion about the risks and benefits, but at the end of the day, it's up to the individuals to make the choice they feel most comfortable with. And I know there's lots of information circulating on the internet, in the community, at the coffee shops, and lots of it's scary. Like, I get it. I've had some people come in to walk in with some really tough questions that they've had for me, and I sit down and listen, provide information, and hope they reach, the answer that's best for them. And hopefully with the information I'm giving them, they come to the conclusion that the vaccination is safe and effective and they make that choice. But no, we certainly don't push it. And, while we're not sanctioned to speak out against any medical treatment, there is a code of ethics and professionalism that we follow from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba. And their mandate is patient safety. So if all of a sudden, a member such as myself started promoting any kind of treatment for any condition that was unsafe for the public, potentially harmful, I would probably have received a call from them to discuss that. But when we're giving advice about any treatments, as long as we're doing it in a courteous, professional manner, listening and answering questions, we're not going to face sanctions to talk about any type of medication.
I would just have to echo what my colleagues have been saying. I have not received any funding or payment. And I hope if you were to talk to any of the patients in my practice, I've had several come forward and ask me questions, and we talk about them. And in the end, I say it's ultimately their decision as to whether or not they want to pursue the vaccination. But I hope that in my answering questions, I perhaps, calm some of the fears and some of the misinformation that has been floating around and been scaring people as well.
Thank you. I want to remind people that you're still allowed to, or you could, if you have questions that arise as we're talking this evening, please put them in the chat space and Doctors Manitoba will pass them on as well. And maybe if you want to in the chat space, you can lobby that I could get a t-shirt like Dr. Convery got as well, but because I wasn't expecting anything for what I'm doing tonight either. So maybe I can get a t-shirt out of the deal. Let's move to some vaccine safety questions. Dr. Klassen, why don't I'll throw two your way. How do we know that vaccines are safe? And how can you prove that vaccines won't have long-term effects?
Yeah, so if you, I'll answer the second part, or try and answer the second part of that first. Necessarily, these vaccines have been developed sometime after March last year, and the time frame is 1.5 years. However, the technology, the mRNA technology, was being utilized or was being researched for probably 2 decades ahead of this pandemic coming to light. So that when this coronavirus came along, the researchers were able to utilize that decade or 2 of experience. They were able to utilize that and very quickly shift to how do you tackle this particular coronavirus and its antigens. And my explanation of immunology is very simple. An antigen is presented to my body when I took the vaccine. My body starts making antibodies and it's now ready should I be exposed to the COVID virus. That's immunology in a nutshell, and the basics of immunology haven't changed appreciably for a long time because it works. So that's how can we say that the long term is ensured? I don't think anybody can, except we do know from prior history that most vaccine-related type effects and side effects tend to happen early. They tend to happen in the month or perhaps two after vaccination. They are not late effects. And then the first part of the question was,
How do we know they're safe?
yeah, how do we? So I partly answered that. I think we know. Additionally, we know they're safe because we went through the three stages of clinical trials with all of the vaccines. That's necessary for them to be approved by Health Canada, as Dr. Convery outlined. We now know from 28 million worldwide vaccinations and 2 billion worldwide, 28 million Canada, that the number of side effects with in particular the mRNA vaccines is exceedingly low. And that should be a very reassuring point for all of us, I think.
Okay, I'm going to ask Dr. Reimer a question that's somewhat related, but another question that came is this. According to some, this vaccine cannot be safe because of the speed at which it was developed and tested. What is an appropriate time factor or frame for testing a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Dr. Convery answered some of this in an earlier question. So, it normally does take years to develop a vaccine, because what normally happens is they have to go through all three stages of the trials before they can submit for approval to Health Canada. Then once Health Canada approves it, they can go to production. And what we did this time was different in a few ways. One was that the whole world started working on this together at the same time. So we used expertise from everywhere, and our work on most other topics kind of ground a little bit to a halt, and everybody focused in on COVID. So that helped it to go a lot faster, just because we had all of our minds and our resources working together at the same time. But one of the other things that was extremely helpful was that the pharmaceutical companies were guaranteed that they would be able to be paid for production, even if we threw away their vaccines. So they were able to start producing the vaccine as they were testing it, knowing that if at the end of their testing, we found out their vaccine didn't work, that wasn't a risk for them financially, because they could throw out the entire batch and still get paid for it. And so that's something that also can be reassuring, to know that the pharmaceutical companies, they don't make extra money because we give you the vaccine. They were already going to get paid just for making, even if it was a garbage vaccine, they were going to get paid. So that helped them to start production right away, because they got that money. And only once we found out that, yes, they were safe and effective, could we start using them. But we saved months and months of time because the production started so early. Likewise, Health Canada focused all their resources on approving these vaccines instead of adding them to the usual queue along with every other vaccine, every other medication. They really put them to the front of the line to get reviewed right away, to get prioritized for their review. So not that the review was faster, just that it went to the front of the line, and they didn't have to wait the months that it usually takes to get to that vaccine for its review. So those are just a couple of things on top of what Dr. Convery said earlier about how the vaccines could be developed so quickly, and how we were able to use decades of mRNA research and experience and just tailor it a little bit to COVID.
I think the other thing that's of note, and maybe it's best if I say this rather than the physicians, but Doctors Manitoba has done a poll of physicians earlier this month, and over 99% indicated that they've already received the COVID-19 vaccine. And that's probably as strong a testimony to this type of question as anything. I don't think they would receive it if they didn't feel it was safe. I think it demonstrates their trust and their understanding of these vaccines as well. I'll move to Dr. Martin for a question, and there will be some follow-up questions to this, which the audience have added, but we'll start with the first question here. Is there a connection with women, even young girls bleeding, having swollen genitals, lumps in their breast tissues, etc., with having received the vaccine or even being around someone who has received the vaccine? Is this a concern? Have there been any cases in your area? Is this being looked into? Should I be worried for my young daughter? So this is a parent asking a very personal and deep question. What kind of response would you offer?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, any parent would be concerned for their child and any potential risks or harms that could come of anything. You know, there hasn't been any evidence of increased risk of breast lumps, swollen genitals, infertility, anything like that. After the injection, you can get some swollen lymph nodes, especially on the side of the injection for a couple of days. And we have noticed that in people, but it's nothing prolonged or lasting. I have heard some anecdotal reports of people perhaps having a delayed cycle or a missed period. Once again, this was not something that lasted, and they went on to have normal menstrual cycles. I have not personally heard of anyone that has been in contact with someone that was vaccinated and then had a missed menstrual cycle or changes in their cycle. But when you look at, 70% of Manitoba has their first dose, and we had issues with missed menstrual cycles or delayed or changes in menstruation before the vaccine was ever available. It's really hard to say that that could even be related to the vaccine because these things happen without the vaccine as well.
Okay, and some related questions that have come in. Either Dr. Martin or others can weigh in on this, whoever wants to. One of the questions, and you've referenced this already, but does the vaccine cause sterility or result in any fertility issues? Does anyone want to respond to that?
I can answer a bit of it there. So during the initial runs for the vaccine and the initial volunteers, there were quite a few inadvertent pregnancies during that time. Now, anytime they try a new medical treatment or vaccination or anything, usually the general advice in the study is to not become pregnant during that time, just as a general safety issue for anything. There were quite a few people ended up getting pregnant, and there were no complications or effects on the fetus, which later became the baby. They also have done some studies in those that were already undergoing in vitro and fertility treatments, and compared those to individuals who had received the vaccination and those who did not, and also even compared to those that had actually had COVID, and they found no difference in the effectiveness of the fertility treatments. And these are people that were having concerns or difficulties with fertility long before COVID was an issue as well. So overall, we've actually had quite a few studies and real world examples that fertility has not been an issue related to the vaccination, and thankfully even related to COVID infection itself.
And another question which an audience member has just submitted is this. Why are pregnant women being encouraged to get vaccinated when no research has ever been done with pregnant women in the trials? I'm not sure who would like to answer that, but maybe one of you can.
I've had several pregnant patients approach me about vaccination safety, and I spoke with one of our local obstetricians gynecologists who directed me to a study, an early results being produced in New England Journal of Medicine, and Dr. Reimer can correct me, but it's some 26,000 participants who have been studied. And early reports and all the early data seems to point to that the vaccines are not harmful in any way to the babies or the moms. And we know that pregnant women who get COVID can have really bad outcomes. And so at this point in time, we think that the benefits of being vaccinated for that population do outweigh the risks. And of course, as always, any side effects that occur will be reported. And if things change, obviously we would recommend accordingly. But for now, yeah, it's still safe for pregnant ladies, and we are recommending that they do get vaccinated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Dr.
maybe I'll
Reimer,
add to that. Yeah, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, so the national level doctors who are experts in pregnancy and delivery, they strongly recommend offering the vaccine to people who are pregnant. And they do that because, first off, we do have the trials that the two other doctors already talked about. The US also did a trial with about 4,000 participants and didn't see any harms at all for the baby or for the person who's pregnant. And we've given out 2.7 billion doses around the world, and nobody's reporting from any country problems related to pregnancy or birth or for the newborns or in breastfeeding. So all of those things have been really reassuring. But like Dr. Convery just said, we have seen complications in pregnancy. And one of those is that sometimes people will have the baby early, and that can lead to lifelong complications for that baby that's born, because when you're born early, you can have lung development issues, you can have problems with your digestive system. Like it's not nothing to be born too early. So we do know about the risks related to COVID in pregnancy. And so far we're seeing good safety data from this vaccine, as well as we've got lots of experience with other vaccines in pregnancy as well. So we've seen very clear benefits to getting the flu vaccine in pregnancy or getting the whooping cough vaccine in pregnancy. We've got great studies showing not only does it help protect, but also some of those antibodies, that army of fighters that your body develops to fight off the virus, in those other vaccines, those antibodies actually go through the placenta to the baby so that the baby has a chance to fight off the infection if they get faced with it before they can get a vaccine. And so we think that there's a good chance that could happen with the COVID vaccine as well, and provide that baby a chance to fight off the virus if they face that virus after being born.
And Dr. Reimer, I'll throw another question your way. What can you tell me about the risk of myocarditis for younger people after taking Pfizer?
Yeah, and that's the new concern that we're hearing a lot about. And that came mostly from the US, a little bit from Israel, where they were seeing higher numbers of swelling around the heart, which sounds really scary, but I'll go into it a little bit more. Than they were in the general population, or what they would expect to see. And so I'll say a few things about that. One is that we haven't seen that in Canada. We're not seeing any higher rates of this swelling around the heart in Canada than we see normally. In fact, we're seeing lower rates so far in people who receive the vaccine compared to the general population. And then the other really important thing to note is that in the US, where they did see higher numbers, we're talking about still, they gave out millions and millions of doses to young people and had, 250 of these cases happen. So incredibly rare, something around, 10 or so cases per million people. And almost all of those cases, they resolved completely with no symptoms lasting, no long-term complications. So this isn't like when you heard about the blood clot stuff with AstraZeneca and people had really severe outcomes. These are people who, yes, they were diagnosed with some swelling, but the swelling was treated with drugs like Advil and went away, and they were fine. They were sent home. Very few ended up in hospital. Very few had serious consequences. So what I can say right now is we don't know if the vaccine truly is causing this. But even if it is, it seems to be causing very mild cases that are resolving on their own. And we see a lot more of this with COVID infection than we do with the vaccine. So you're actually protecting yourself against something like myocarditis by getting the vaccine, because you'll be less likely to get the infection, which can cause the same, if not more severe versions of this problem.
Dr. Convery, will the mRNA in the Pfizer Moderna vaccine alter my DNA?
Yeah, thanks. No, I've heard this question a few times and seen it on other town halls and certainly online. And the answer is that it won't. So the DNA of your cell is located in the nucleus. The delivery mechanism for these vaccinations is that once they enter the cell, the delivery mechanism is broken down, and then the cell will move the protein to the surface of the cell that it mimics the spike protein. So our body can start that process of building immunity up. So your DNA is nice and safe and secure.
Okay. Dr. Martin, I'm going to read a bit of a longer question and ask you to respond. I was interested in taking one of two vaccines, either Pfizer or Moderna, for COVID, since it seems that the only way they will open up the province for traveling. Recently, serious evidence has come to light that the spike proteins are breaking off and entering the bloodstream, which is potentially very dangerous to one's health. I most certainly do not want to take a vaccine that can potentially damage my health or may be as dangerous as the virus itself. Do you think this will get corrected, or how do you respond to this type of concern?
Yeah, understandably, that's a big concern for a lot of people. The most common study that I'm familiar with for people having received this information from was a study where they had checked and vaccinated 13 individuals, and they'd found 11 had a very small amount of spike protein in their bloodstream, less than 1%. Importantly, though, what the people don't often bring up is when they had the second vaccination and they reran these tests, in those people, they didn't find the spike protein, saying that the immunization did what we wanted. You created those antibodies that help neutralize that. Overall, it's a very, very, very small component. And the writer and creator and designer of that study, Uri Manner, has even said that the results are being misinterpreted. I'm also aware of another figure going around indicating that it's showing spike protein pickup in the ovaries, but it's actually not referring to spike proteins either. It's referring to the lipid nanoproteins that are particles that are the vector for the vaccination. Importantly, the vaccine itself does not contain spike proteins. It has mRNA. And we haven't shown that these spike proteins that your body makes behave in the same way as the innate spike protein from the COVID infection itself and the actual virus. Remember, you're getting the spike protein, but not any of the other viral components. So relatively speaking, that risk is extremely small that it causes anything. And the vast majority of the spike protein does stay in the lymph nodes.
Thank you. Dr. Convery, are there aborted fetuses or fetal cells used in producing the vaccines? This is a question a number of people have asked.
Yeah, and I've had this personally at the hospital from nurses, as well as in my clinic from patients. And it's a very important question because obviously it's a sensitive issue. There's ethical considerations here for lots of people, and I truly do appreciate that. So some people know that there were fetal tissues used years ago in the 70s and 80s, and from that, some fetal cell lines have been developed, which has been involved with the production of certain vaccinations. The vaccinations for the coronavirus, they did not have these cells used at any stage along the production. So the product going into our arms does not contain anything from fetal cell lines, which aren't fetal tissue to begin with, but they do not come into contact with that during the production. And when it goes into your body, it does not contain any of that stuff. There are, at one point during the confirmation testing, they use some of those fetal cell lines to confirm the vaccine works. But again, that product that we're getting into our bodies does not contain anything from fetal cell lines.
Okay. Recognizing the time, I'm going to combine three questions for Dr. Reimer that are related to second dose issues or related to the second dose of the virus. The first one is, why are people all of a sudden saying Moderna is okay when originally I received Pfizer and vice versa? A related question, should I wait for my second Pfizer dose already booked or get a second dose of Moderna 2 weeks sooner? And another question around second doses would be this: what should I be aware of in terms of side effects after when I receive a second dose of Pfizer if I had the AstraZeneca dose the first time? So a number of questions around second doses.
Yeah, so I'm sure most of you have heard that we have started to say that, if you need to get the other product for your second dose, that's okay. And that comes from a number of things. The main thing that we're basing that on is decades of experience and research around different vaccine products and brands, and how we've seen that in the vast majority of cases, switching brands and sometimes even switching vaccine types still provides excellent protection. So we do this with hepatitis, with influenza, with rabies, with a lot of the different vaccines that we use all the time. And we just don't tend to have this level of attention on it. So people don't ask or get told what brand they're receiving of different vaccines. So that's the main thing that this is based on, is just knowing the immune response that we get is not based on the brand that made the vaccine. It's based on how that immune response is triggered. And for Moderna and Pfizer, it's triggered the same way. It's the messenger RNA that helps your body, teaches your body how to make the spike protein to trigger that immune response. And so we expect the same response from either brand. And then on top of that, we have these reassuring studies that are small, but coming out of Spain and Germany, and hopefully soon out of the UK, that showed us that the COVID vaccines do appear to be behaving the same way as these decades of experience that we have with other vaccines. So while I know that those studies from Europe were small, they really were more confirmation that there's nothing different here. The immune response is the same as what we've seen with other vaccines, and it's very good regardless of whether or not you switch brands. So what we recommend then is, if you can stick with the same brand, that's great. Stick with the same brand. That's what was originally studied by the pharmaceutical company. We have no issue with that. But if it means that you're going to be delaying your second dose by weeks, you're better off to just take the brand that's available to you and not delay that dose. Get protected sooner than later, because we do know we have the Delta variant in Manitoba. We're hopefully coming to the end of this third wave, and we want to keep it that way. So getting yourself protected as soon as possible is the best way to go. And for side effects, we really expect the same side effects as what you would get regardless of what combination you get. There's been 3 different trials that looked at side effects. One found there were more if you mix, one found it was the same, and one found there were more side effects when you stick with the same vaccine. So all 3 found slightly different things, which means that it's probably about the same, regardless of what combination you get for side effects.
A quick follow-up question that just came in via the one of the listeners. Will one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine be available for use in Canada soon?
Yeah, so Health Canada has approved Johnson & Johnson for use in Canada, but so far the initial shipment that got sent to Canada, there were some issues at the plant. And so Health Canada has decided that they will not be releasing that shipment, that they don't feel confident in the safety because of some of the issues at the original plant. In the future, it's possible that doses could come to Canada, but so far we have so much more mRNA, so much Moderna and Pfizer coming in. We really don't need another vaccine. We've got, in Manitoba, hundreds of thousands of doses of Moderna coming in over the next few weeks. So I don't think that Johnson & Johnson is ever going to play a major role in the vaccine rollout in Canada. And we're probably better served by getting it to countries that aren't first in the world for vaccine coverage. Canada's #1 in the world for getting first doses. And so it's probably better for us to let some of those other countries get Johnson & Johnson and help protect them, because really we're one big global community. And so the more we can get vaccines around the world, the better off all of us are.
I'm realizing it's 7:25 and we said this would be about an hour. The doctors have agreed to stay on for about an extra 10 minutes so we'll try to get through about 10 more minutes worth of questions, and then we'll do a quick wrap up and try to aim to conclude by 7:40. So a few more rapid questions if possible. Maybe I should just add to that, if your questions don't get covered, I remind you again that the site manitobavaccine.ca has many questions and many answers on it. It's a very wonderful resource to even follow up on some of the answers you've received tonight. Dr. Martin, what is the optimal timing between vaccine doses?
Yeah, so right now we are recommending 28 days between doses. Mind you, for AstraZeneca, that changes a little bit. So if your first dose was AstraZeneca and your second dose is a different vaccination, they're recommending about 8 weeks. If your first dose was AstraZeneca and the second is AstraZeneca, then they're recommending about 12 weeks. And the reason for the difference between the length and the AstraZeneca doses is that they found for that particular vaccination, the longer time frame in between did seem to give a better response. But overall, generally, if you're talking about Moderna and Pfizer, the minimum recommended time is the 28 days.
Dr. Reimer, is getting a first dose of Pfizer but a second dose of Moderna as effective against the Delta variant as getting 2 doses of Pfizer?
Well, Moderna and Pfizer work the same way. So both of them are providing kind of like a recipe card or instruction sheet to your body to tell you how to build up that immune response. We're pretty early in the studies on the Delta variant because we always have new variants. And as soon as we learn about the Delta variant, we're going to have a fifth. We'll have an Epsilon variant at some point. But everything we've seen so far seems to show that 2 doses of mRNA is effective against the Delta variant. So regardless of what mixture of brands you get, we anticipate that it's going to provide good protection against the Delta variant. And we'll have to keep watching because at some point there could be a variant that our immune system doesn't recognize after vaccine. And so maybe in the future we'll have to have a 3rd dose. But for today, it seems like these vaccines work well against all of the variants of concern.
Thank you. Dr. Convery, how do the variants develop and why are they becoming more transmissible and serious than the first strain?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll throw an answer out there, and Dr. Reimer might have a better answer than me. But they're just mutations in the virus. So the viruses are smart, and they can change the way they present to the cell, and it makes it harder for our bodies to fight them. So this happens often with viruses. So influenza viruses and other viruses, we see mutations and variants. The reason that some of these variants are becoming variants of concern is because they're more transmissible, they're more aggressive, and they're causing more severe illness in humans. So that's why they're labeled variants of concern. And as we've already talked about tonight, there's 4 that we kind of hear a lot about, named after some letters of the Greek alphabet. And hopefully we don't get all the way to the end of the Greek alphabet before they kind of shut down. But that's how they develop, and they can become more aggressive as they mutate further. So
a few more questions have come in. I'm going to open this up to any doctor who is willing to go at this, or I'll pick on my brother, whichever the case might be. But a question here, with the high rates of unvaccinated people in southern Manitoba, could a new variant emerge? Who wants to go after that one?
Okay, you picked on me. I think, as I understand virology, the more circulating virus you have in a community or in an area, the more times that virus is turning over, and the more likely, from my understanding, is for that mutation, which Dr. Convery referred to happen. So I think, I'm not sure what a virologist would say, but I think it means that there's always the chance going from Delta to Epsilon and beyond. With more circulating virus, I'm thinking there's a higher chance. How much higher? I don't know the answer to that.
Does anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add. We actually already have several Manitoba-specific variants because there's thousands and thousands of variants around the world. So the ones that we have in Manitoba haven't been worse than the original type. So that's why you don't hear about them, because they behave the same way as the original type. But at any point, the next Manitoba-specific variant could be worse. And that's really, I know Dr. Convery already talked about how these mutations are happening all the time. And so, so far we're really happy that the Manitoba specific variants are not worse, but it's any day the next one could be worse. It's a bit of luck and a bit of what Dr. Klassen said, where the more virus you have, the more variation that can happen.
Okay, and we've got another very practical question that's just come in. Can I get the inoculation other than in my arm? And does the second needle have to be in the same place?
As I understand it, does not have to be in the same place. I think people just naturally often offer their non-dominant arm when it comes to injections. And so if you're right-handed, you probably had both your shots in the left arm for that reason. I'm not sure. I haven't had anybody request having it in other locations. The main other location wouldn't lend itself to public, supercenter administration, as I understand it. What do you say, Joss?
Yeah, we have had some folks who maybe they have some sort of issue with their arms and can't receive vaccines there. So yes, you can get it in the thigh or in the glute. And no, you don't usually want to drop your pants in a super site. So it does require some special programming, but you absolutely can get it. We picked the deltoid because it's a big muscle that's easily accessible, but any big muscle is fine.
There's about 7-8 questions left, and we're not going to get through them all. So I'm just going to end with one final question that's on the sheet that I have here. And then I'm going to invite all of you as physicians, maybe just to make a wrap-up comment, if you wish. The question I'm choosing is this: if I'm fully vaccinated, can I still carry and transmit the virus to others? Am I going to have to pick on someone?
I think we're getting more data rolling in that it greatly decreases the risk. Once again, we said at the beginning as well that, nothing is 100%. So vaccination still isn't 100%. So even people that are completely vaccinated, if you're having symptoms, you should still be cautious with those symptoms and seek out care and appropriate testing as well. When we quote the efficacy of the vaccines, that's the pattern that we're seeing overall. But when I'm comparing person to person, I don't know if you're that person that had the 93% effective, if for some reason it was only 70% effective in you. So I'd say from the evidence that's emerging, it's showing that it is reducing that risk. But I think we're still playing it cautious with our precautions and our recommendations because we don't want to lead people down the garden path, so to speak, and create new issues.
Okay. And Dr. Martin, while you're on the screen or while your mic isn't muted, let's make a quick round around the panelists. And do you have any final words, any of you, that you'd like to share as final words or encouragements to people who are listening tonight?
I just hope that they found this evening an accessible way to ask questions that I know have been very common in our community and concerns that a lot of individuals have expressed. And I hope that we've been able to provide some useful information to you. And if you have more questions, to seek out your care providers as well and talk to them and, make your decision based on your personal values and what you've heard. And hopefully this helps with a little bit more information that way.
Dr. Klassen?
Yeah, I appreciate having the opportunity to be here. I would like to say to anyone who's listening, you have a chance to make a decision. We think, and you've heard us say it, that the decision to get vaccinated is an important one. You should have all the information that you can possibly have to make that decision, but then you will have to make it. And a bit of a side note, I don't think making that decision is like me deciding on the blue shirt versus the green shirt this morning. Some decisions have a level of importance that's higher. And then finally, I would like to say that when you've made that decision to be vaccinated, that's your decision. You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to ask anybody. Your boss can't tell you to do it or not do it. It's a personal decision. If the super center is a place that you'd rather not go to have your vaccination, talk to any one of us. Talk to our colleagues. We'll arrange for you to get the vaccination.
Dr. Convery.
Yeah, thanks, John, for moderating tonight. And I'd just like to thank, everyone on the panel, especially Dr. Reimer, for giving her time I know you're from Winkler, but it's been excellent having your expertise on this discussion. It took a lot of my nerves away because I knew I had someone that I could rely on. And you've done an awesome job throughout this pandemic in front of the cameras, promoting an excellent message. I'd also like to thank everyone that's tuned in tonight. I know some people have tuned in just because you're curious. Some people are deciding, and even if we've helped one or two people decide to get vaccinated, that's great. Ultimately, deciding whether or not to be vaccinated for COVID-19 is up to you. I personally feel all 3 COVID-19 vaccinations are highly effective in preventing serious disease, hospitalizations, and death from COVID-19. I said that earlier. And I mean, ultimately in medicine, we respect the decision of all competent patients and we provide recommendations, but whether you accept or reject those recommendations with any aspect of your health is up to you. And that includes our recommendation for vaccination. But I hope from tonight's question and answers, you've had some of your concerns alleviated, and hopefully you've made that decision to go ahead and get vaccinated for yourselves, for your loved ones, and for your community. So thanks again for tuning in.
Dr. Reimer?
Yeah, I'm also just really thankful to everyone who joined us today, because I know you have questions, and some of the questions we didn't get to, I saw were really individual questions about people who had, vomiting after the dose, or someone with MS who wants some advice on whether or not to get the vaccine and in what context, and someone who had some numbness after the vaccine. So, all of these questions are really important. And we have 3 local experts who have joined us tonight, but I worked at Dr. C.W. Wiebe Medical Center before I started medical school. And then during medical school, I did rotations at Boundary Trails and at what is now Menzies Medical Center, was Agassiz at the time. So I can personally attest that there are many, many experts in Winkler and Morden who would be so eager to answer your questions. So for some of those personal questions that we couldn't address tonight, talking to the 3 other docs on the panel tonight, or your own family doc, or at the walk-in, please take advantage of these folks who live and work in your community and just want the best for everybody there. One of my jobs is to review the charts of everyone who gets COVID and dies and is under 60. And I would really like to not have to do that anymore, because the stories I'm reading are heartbreaking. When I have to read about someone deciding to turn off a ventilator for their spouse, or getting called in the middle of the night because somebody passed away unexpectedly, or hearing about someone's child that died in Children's Hospital, these are heartbreaking. And this is something that your doctors are seeing all the time, and we don't want to. And so, we're asking you to talk to your doctor and to consider getting vaccinated, because we don't want to hear these stories anymore, and we don't want to see this heartbreak. So I'm just really thankful to everyone who joined, and so thankful that there are the doctors on the panel and those who are not on the panel but work in these communities who are so dedicated to these communities.
On behalf of all of us who have watched this evening, I want to say thank you to you as physicians for your caring and compassionate service to our communities for many years, and for your insightful answers this evening. I'm truly thankful that when we face something as frightening as COVID-19, that we have a medical community that has cared for us for many years, providing guidance even now. And for me, as a person trying to make decisions, having a place to find well-researched and knowledgeable answers is key as I make medical decisions. And we had that opportunity tonight, so I thank you for that. I also wish to thank all who tuned in this evening, all of you for joining us. Thanks for your important questions. And I'll remind you for a final time that if your question wasn't answered, we're sorry about that. There were just more questions that we could handle. Please go to manitobavaccine.ca. It's loaded with great questions, hopefully including yours, and with excellent answers. I want to wish all of you health, wisdom, and grace as we continue to journey through this pandemic. Blessings to all of you, and good night. Thank you.